And we are live. We'll give people a minute to catch on. I'll try and share this real quick again.
Okay. Okay, I just shared it to my page as well.
Thank you, thank you. We have 4 people. It's going to be a new link on YouTube too. I hope they.
Okay. I'll try to share it on my Facebook too.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, we're so sorry. We we got spammed with bots, and maybe that caused our Facebook link to just not work. And so when we started the broadcast, it only went to YouTube and LinkedIn. So we made a new one, and hopefully people will catch on and come here. If you can help us out by going to the old, someone can go to the old event, and hopefully some of our NeuroClastic moderators can do that for us and let people know in that event that we are here now. Sorry about that, but looks like people are coming in. So welcome everyone. I'm Tara Vance. We've had several unplanned things today, and our co-hosts both had some last minute things happening, and we wish them the best. So you just have me as a host today, but thank you for coming, Jules and Candace. Welcome. Can I just turn it over to you to introduce yourself first, Jules?
Sure. Thank you, Tara. I'm Jules Edwards. I write as Autistic Typing. I'm on all the socials, autistictyping.com. I'm a disability justice advocate. I am Anishinaabe. I live in Minnesota. And I don't know what else. I feel like introductions are so colonial and like hierarchical. So it's kind of tough to do that all the time. So I like that I didn't have to do that for this.
Good. Thank you, Candace.
Hey, watch everybody. Candace Linklater, Dishna Castle. My name's Candace Linklater, and I'm very honored and happy to be here today. So I'm also known as Relentless Indigenous Woman on Facebook. I post things on there about advocacy for Indigenous folks, and I post a lot about anti-colonial stuff, some humor, and then a lot of encouragement. I'm originally from Moose Factory, Ontario, from Moose Cree First Nation, Treaty 9 territory. And I was born and raised. I'm currently a visitor right here on Algonquin territory, also known as Ottawa, Ontario. I'm also a consultant on the side where I provide workshops on education. My specialty is my PhD in education, and I'm an educator by trade. I love to teach, and that's what brought me to Facebook, and I think that's where the growth happens. But yeah, I'm very excited to be here to talk about intergenerational trauma and my insights and what I've learned so far in life and experience. So, thank you much.
Thank you so much. And we'll just get started, especially since we're had a bit of a delay, and also, we're not the best at small talk here anyways. I'm just going to get right to it and start with Jules. Can you tell us a little bit about what intergenerational trauma is and who is susceptible to experiencing that?
Sure. Intergenerational trauma is trauma that's passed through the generations of people, inherited from our ancestors. And it begins with all of the acts of violence that our ancestors experienced from early settlers and different policies that colonial governments imposed. I'm in the US, so the ones I'm most familiar with are US-based laws. But it's important to recognize that people indigenous to Turtle Island are not defined by colonial borders. So even though I'm Anishinaabe and I'm in the US, there are Anishinaabe people in Canada as well. So I'm familiar with things like the Indian Removal Act. Indian boarding schools happened in both the US and Canada. There were starvation experiments on children, which is how our food pyramid came to exist. The Indian Reorganization Act, whereas colonial governments required that Indigenous people take on colonial forms of government. And that's how we ended up with like Indian tribal councils and things like that. And assimilation, like requiring Indigenous people to speak English or French in some cases. That again is more common in Canada. Basically, the loss of everything that Indigenous people have known and thrived with, including our food sources and our relationship with the land. The loss of that carries through all of the generations. So today, that those harms are still occurring. Like in the US, we have forced removal of children from their family homes by child protection. And those children are often placed in white homes. And right now, in the US, the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is an act that was meant to protect Indigenous children and keep them within their communities, is being challenged in front of the US Supreme Court because a single white family in Texas feels entitled to own an Indigenous child. And there's a lot of different theoretical frameworks and ways of assessing what's happened and how we got where we are now. Lawrence Gross is a researcher, academic who focuses on Indigenous communities and spirituality specifically. And he describes something called the post-apocalypse stress syndrome. And it's kind of like PTSD, but it's on an intergenerational level. And so this impacts everyone. Everyone can experience intergenerational trauma, and especially people who experience oppression. And on Turtle Island, that is Indigenous people and people of African descent. And the APA, specifically the American Psychological Association, recognizes that intergenerational trauma research originated within Indigenous communities because this is information we have known for all of time. We have known for all of time that everything that we do reflects our ancestors and has an impact on future generations of people. And it's funny because epigenetic research, which is a colonial word for all of this, epigenetic research is learning things that we've always known, including recent research that is showing that epigenetic memories are passed down for 14 generations within roundworms. So if we see that that's happening for worms, and humans are so much more complex, and we look at, we look back 7 generations and look forward 7 generations. Isn't it ironic that they can specifically say 14 generations of worms are impacted? Anyway, so that's kind of a Cliff's Notes version of what that is.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to pivot to Candace now and ask, what are some of the ways that intergenerational trauma shows up in people's lives?
It can show up in many different ways. I could list a numerous amount of ways specifically for Indigenous folks. But I'll speak more specifically because that's my experience. That's what I have. There are many ways that it comes about, and one of them would be relationship patterns. Because the breakdown of our families occurred as a product of, residential and boarding school, where Indigenous children were taken from the government to placed in these schools to be converted into what the country would be, either America or Canada. And that just totally broke down the whole functionality of how we traditionally are operated. They took away the children, it affected us. So it affected it affected parenting, it affected the bonding, it affected marital relationships. And a lot of those dynamics trickle down from generation to generation. And it's not always clear to see, because it's something that we normalize, like a dysfunction. Oh, that's just how my family is. But it does stem from that. It does stem from colonialism. So it's not to like blame ourselves and to blame our people. It's just, I think what's important is noticing it. And if you're that person that notices it, I think that's huge in itself, noticing it, and then perhaps taking steps to heal that. Another way that generational trauma shows up is not questioning authority or not questioning caregivers. So because we were, institutionalized for so long with these schools and with the Indian Act here in Canada, and there's a similar act in America, we've been so paternalized and controlled by the government for so long that it is difficult for us to question authority, because anytime we did before, we were imprisoned. So anytime we do it now, that's like kind of a genetic memory that we have, a tendency to not question anything. And I think that's what's so exciting about this new generation is we're questioning things. And that's what I did a talk yesterday with a nonprofit organization called Downey Wenjack Fund. And they talk about truth and reconciliation. And I think one of the things is when we're not questioning why things are the way they are. And even questioning things from the patriarchy, like gender binaries, for example. That seems to be a huge thing right now. Like people can't seem to understand that there's more genders than a man and a woman. Nobody has ever questioned that before or brought it forth, because the colonial way of thinking and doing is just a man and a woman, and that's it. That's pretty damn boring, in my opinion. There's so many different ways to be, and there's so many different ways to be holistic and to be human and to show up in this world. Like, how boring, just a man and a woman? No, like there's so much more depth and fluidity in our worlds. And I think when we're not questioning that and we're not challenging that, or we're just accepting that, there are many, Indigenous folks that just accept that there's only man and woman, and that's just how it is. And they even do ceremonies, just that and that. There's no room for any fluidity at all. And I think that's a product of generational trauma. That's a very dangerous product of intergenerational trauma, because there's a lot of folks that don't feel welcomed or accepted or loved in these spaces. It's a very dangerous one. And we also have generational trauma can show up as imposter syndrome, because many of us are in these spaces that our ancestors have never been in before. I wrote a status yesterday about there were doors that were closed for our ancestors, but we're buying the building now. It's our turn now. We're asking the questions, we're challenging now. So I think even just noticing that there's something wrong, there's no justice here, there's nothing fair here. The moment you get used to being uncomfortable with asking those questions, and be okay with researching on your own if you can, or just ask people that may know more about that topic. And that's why I do what I do. I teach those things and why things are the way they are, to try to restructure different organizations, push people to the limit. That's why I talk about what I do on my page. Get people thinking, get people inspired to question. And I think that's how it can show up for many people. Miigwech for the question.
I love that. I love everything that you said. And I think I was thinking about how in our lives we have so much messaging that encourages us to stay stuck in that generational trauma, and how I try and kind of manage my own health even, is to purposefully curate what messaging I am receiving. And so not just looking at a post from Relentless Indigenous Woman or Autistic Typing, but following it and doing those deep dives and really learning and connecting with my ancestors. And so I think people can benefit so much from just curating. When you find someone who's been doing this work longer than you, follow them and cherish the empowerment that they've been doing this work for a while, and you can learn from that. So, Candace, how is generational trauma connected to systemic oppression?
Oh, through many ways. One of the ways, that Indigenous folks have been systematically oppressed was from the Indian Act, and that what Jules? Sorry, your name's really small on the screen.
Oh no.
And I have my glasses on too. Is it Jules?
Sorry. Yeah.
Jules, awesome. What Jules was saying earlier about like these tribal councils and whatnot, those were actually created to be in place of quote unquote Indian agents. So they were there to, make sure everything is going as planned according to the Indian Act, but they made the people their own Indian agents. And that's the truth. And it's hard for me to accept that because even I was on chief and council back home, but that's just how it is. But at the same time, it can show up like just acceptance for this is just the way that it is, without pushing the envelope and understanding that we had our own governing systems, and it was quite vastly different than how things are going about right now. Also, again, systemic oppression, it could show up like internalized racism from always being left out. For example, I'm from the res, and my res the other week, they had no power, and it was -30. And there was no like state of emergency, like stated at that time. And it was an emergency, and it like families were cold, people were cold, and there were babies and elders, and like, this doesn't make the news. This doesn't like, and like, we just like, not many of us, like, we're not like accepting of it, but it's so commonplace that happens so often that there is a danger of like internalizing that, like, oh, that we're always left out, we're always left behind, and therefore I'm not that important. So we internalize those messages, and it can be really damaging. I know I have to challenge those messages a lot. Systemic oppression, again, it shows up in curriculum in schools. The voice from Indigenous people are not heard when we're talking about history. I always post every year about Thanksgiving in America, specifically in Columbus Day, because it's really whitewashed. There's a lot of whitewashed curriculum in the way that we learn, the way that schools operate. All of those things are systemic oppression for control and imposing a certain idea or belief, or indoctrinating in some way or another. Also, another huge one, and since we're here with NeuroClastic and autistic typing, the idea of neurotypical in itself is oppression. I hope you'll go on about this later, Jules, because neurotypicality comes from the science of the privileged and the white. A lot of the psychology that we see today and that we studied in psychology, I have a psychology background, most of those theories were based on the white and the privileged. And the neurotypical was just, if you're not this way, you don't behave in this like privileged way, then you're neurodivergent or different, or you're othered, and we're like set aside, like, oh, they have ADHD and autism, or that's them and they're different. I think that there's a danger in that, making, us feel like there's something wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. And there's nothing wrong with you. I think we have to keep saying that. There's nothing wrong with us. It's just so embedded in our systems, in schools, like that child is developmentally blah, 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 or learning disability and whatnot. It's just, you know what it is? It's because the schools don't teach the way that children learn. And I could go on about that one. That's literally what I do for work in school. But yeah, that's how it can show up in different systems, oppression. So thank you for that question.
So, Tara, I know that we have like another planned point, but I'm gonna like slide
Do
in
it.
where Candace
Just
left
do it,
off a little
Jules.
bit. So,
Get on
um,
the soapbox.
yeah. So, in pretty much every Indigenous language that I'm familiar with, we did not have a word for disability. And I want to be specific about, I only know about Anishinaabe culture. I don't subscribe to pan-Indianism, which is the idea that all Indigenous people are the same. We're not. We all have very distinct cultures, languages, traditions, norms, etc. But from my awareness, I have never heard of any Indigenous language that has a word for disability. And that is because we didn't other people that way. We always, in Anishinaabe culture, we perceived babies, elders, and disabled people, even though we didn't say disabled, as sacred beings. And people, all people need help sometimes. All people need help sometimes. Interdependence is a core component of Anishinaabe culture. And to be able to like other someone and say they don't belong, that's not traditional. I had an uncle who, in hindsight, he was almost positively autistic. He kept to himself. He was a little eccentric. Everybody loved him. And there was no caveat to that. He was accepted and celebrated exactly as who he was. And nobody ever looked at him and thought he was broken or missing a piece or whatever other colonial concept that we impose on people who are neurodivergent. And it's kind of crap that when we live under these systems of oppression, of colonialism, we think about who didn't make it through the residential schools. It was the non-compliant kids. It was the neurodivergent kids. It was the rebels. It was the people who couldn't comply. And so how many neurodivergent Indigenous people were extinguished? That whole concept of kill the Indian, save the man, that originated, I think it was a school in Pennsylvania. And they turned that into a whole campaign. But when settlers see someone as savage or as non-compliant or as uncivilized or whatever other label they want to ascribe, they want to end it. They want to end that person as they exist. But if you have a neurodevelopmental disability, or if you're neurodivergent, that's not something you can extinguish. So there were additional targets. And then when Candace mentioned about gender fluidity and all the different ways that gender is experienced by people, it reminds me of Buju. He was one of the most well-known characters in traditional Anishinaabe stories. And I'm going to pull something up I wrote about him a while ago. So the most well-known character in traditional Anishinaabe stories is Buju, a trickster known by many names. And he or she or they was a shape-shifting, half human and half spirit being, not a god, but perhaps a demigod, and the genderless son of the sun, or perhaps the daughter of the wind. That was ingrained in our teachings. That's a core component of our culture, is having gender not being a binary. That was just the baseline. And we had all kinds of different words that describe gendered experiences. But I think that's important to know, is that we didn't ascribe that false binary.
Thank you for that. And as we think about what we've lost, and what we've been deprived of because of generational trauma, Jules, what are some of the things that everyone has been deprived of, or specifically Indigenous people, and then also everyone. How does intergenerational trauma deprive us of the experience that we could have?
We are deprived of a lot. There's Candace was talking about loss of power recently. And I think about the Navajo Nation here in the US. They don't have running water in a lot of places. It is 2023, and some of our reservations don't have running water. And all of our safe water is at risk because of pipelines coming in through corporations and government allowed right of ways, which means that even though the land is, colonizers call it owned, but I perceive it as stewarding the land. Indigenous people steward the land, but then the government comes in and says, well, this corporation gets to lay their pipeline there. What are you doing? So that risks safe water for Indigenous communities, but also everyone and the entire environment. We have lost food sovereignty, which impacts our health. Diabetes, heart disease, obesity, all of these things didn't really happen in pre-colonial times. Our bodies were not designed or adapted for the modern American diet, which is why we have such disparate rates of diabetes, heart disease, etc. So our health, our safety, our peace, there's no peace. I'm still worried. I will say unequivocally that I used to not be a great mom, but today I'm a great mom. And I still worry every time I upset somebody, specifically if I upset a settler. I am worried that child protection will show up at my front door and steal my children, because that is the legacy of America. That is the legacy of Canada. That's what this land does. It steals our babies. And so my internal peace isn't there. I don't have the same experience that settlers have as a parent. I worry based on my race. I worry based on my disability that my children will be stolen. And I have to live with that all the time. So that limits my ability to be vulnerable. It limits my, it limits me a lot as a human. And how I interact with the world. We've lost peace externally. We've lost the ability to be a community, because it seems to be there's always outsiders who want to chime in or want to control Indigenous peoples. And that's how it's been since arrival of the settlers. It's a loss of autonomy and agency and community.
It's a tyranny of sameness. And instead of having space for different perspectives that all can lend something valuable, there is such a discomfort with difference. And I think that's something we see so much of, that harms everyone. Everyone loses their capacity to, because you're less valuable in colonialized systems if you're different, if you're not assimilated into that culture of sameness. And I hope that everyone here can look back at times when they have caused harm, and instead of trying to hide those, admit that happened. And you were raised in a society and a system that causes harm inherently, and that we can start to identify that and help each other to not do it again. Candace, do you have any advice for anybody, for people who have caused harm due to generational trauma, before they could identify what they were doing. And, can we forgive ourselves and even our parents and ancestors for causing and perpetuating that harm?
Yeah, I think I have like just a simple answer for that for now, just for folks to reflect on. We were surviving, and many of us are still in survival mode. And I think there should be space for understanding and just leaving space for that. And both things can be true. There could be understanding, but you could also still be hurt. So acknowledging those two things. So I understand where this is coming from, and I'm hurt about this. So you can feel both. You don't have to be one or the other. There's no perfect way to heal. There's no perfect way to go about this. I know forgiveness is one way to beautifully alchemize things, but you don't have to offer forgiveness where you don't see fit, where if that doesn't work for your journey yet, or you're not there. Just understanding that it is a journey. It doesn't have to be this or that. You don't have to be completely kind. Oh, sorry, there's someone at my door. One sec.
You can go ahead and get that, and we'll pivot
Yeah.
to Jules and come back when you're ready.
Yes.
Jules, can we forgive ourselves? And do you have any advice for people who realize that they have caused harm because of generational trauma?
Yeah, so forgiveness is a colonial concept, and it really came from, I believe, the Christian faith. And it's not to say I'm anti-forgiveness, but I'm saying it doesn't necessarily apply to me or my my way of life. So there is a word in Ojibwe that I learned from James. I can't remember his last name, but he does the Ojibwe word of the day. And the word is called Bunendamoen. Bunendamoen. Yes, I think. I probably pronounced that wrong because I'm still a very beginning language learner. But it loosely translates to forgiveness, but technically it means to cease thinking about it. And it's kind of the last step in processing harm and repairing damage. And then you move on because there are better things to focus on and to do. So, but it's kind of the last step of repairing harm. And so something that others might understand as a framework is a practice of restorative justice. And that's like, you can't undo harm that you've caused, but you can learn about it. You can try to repair it, and you can move on. So Candace is back. So we'll go back to you.
Thank you so much for taking that. I received a gift from my parents, which was really nice. So no, in terms of like forgiveness and whatnot, I think that's a huge one, and that many folks may not be willing to, totally embrace that part yet, and that's okay, because having. But I think where some danger could lie is identifying too much with the pain, where that is the only thing that you can grasp onto or identify with, and try to just step outside of the pain for a moment and look at it, and be compassionate with yourself when you're doing that. Be gracious with yourself and others. We're still learning. I know, like, living in a colonial world, there's like this rush and this need to do things a certain way and have perfection, and that's a lie. It's an illusion. There's no rush to do this. Go at your pace and give yourself grace. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Jules, we've been talking a lot about how trauma walls us off from our identity and core self, and keeps us in a cycle of reacting to the behavior of others and the systems around us that we inhabit, as opposed to standing in and getting to know ourselves. What are some ways that people can begin to reconnect to their core selves when they realize they've been robbed of understanding who they are, not just for their lives, but generationally.
So when I first heard this question, or when I first read this question, I was like a little standoffish. Like, what do you mean? Because everything is related. So as an Indigenous person, I hold a relational worldview, which is the understanding of the interconnectedness between myself and the environment and the earth and everyone around me and everything that's happened to me and everything that's happened to my ancestors. So I can't separate myself from that, but I can understand it from the perspective of code switching and living under colonialism, and as an autistic person, masking and putting on my game face every day to meet the demands of a society that doesn't accept me for who I am. So the trauma is hard because I will acknowledge that I'm somewhat reactive at times, and it is definitely trauma-based, and it's hard to know that, but it's harder to be in a reactive space. So being able to set boundaries between yourself and others, and be able to say, I need this in this moment. And something that I do, and a lot of people really don't like it, but I back off. When I'm in an activated space personally, if I'm feeling reactive, if I'm feeling a trauma response coming on, I will a lot of the time be like, I'll come back to this when I'm ready. Because I need to have that time to process and to be deliberate and intentional about how I want to respond to things. Unfortunately, other people don't receive that well a lot of the time, and I can't control that, but I can control myself. So being able to say, I need some time, I need some processing time. This topic is off limits for me, or this is too traumatic for me to continue, something like that. I have to be able to say that in order to feel safe. And unfortunately, I've received some pretty harsh reactions to those boundaries and that distance that I have to set, but I have to set that for my own well-being. And also because I know that if I respond with a trauma reaction, then it goes real messy real quick. So that's something that I do. And it's not a wall off, but it's give me some processing time and I'll come back when I'm ready. And it might be a long time before I'm ready, and that has to be okay.
I love that. And I think just even you addressing the wording of this and other questions that is reclaiming what core self is just a thing that NeuroClastic uses specifically. It's not a part of any other framework. And it's like your own voice versus the reaction you feel to things happening to you. And so that's what we meant by that. But to see you saying these things are not worded the way that I would word them, and addressing that, I think, is a part of just reclaiming your core self. And I thank you for saying that, because a lot of the times, even having someone tell you that something doesn't work for them personally causes people to become defensive and to say, well, yes, it does work. And then they want to explain, well, what I really meant was, or what I was doing. And that's that pressure for us to all be the same and to never mess up and to never step on each other's toes, or just even be different and have different words for things and have different experiences. So I think that you demonstrated even some of that, what we would word at NeuroClastic, just based on the things that we created ourselves as core self, is like taking that space to say, this is the framework that I use and this is how I understand it. And then to accept that outside, for other people need to accept that and say, okay, that's okay if you're using different language. Thank you for sharing that with me. That's not a threat to me, but that's a part of generational trauma, is seeing any kind of difference as threat. So thank you for doing that. I have one more question for Candace, and then we're going to open up for the last probably about 10 minutes for the audience to ask questions. So if you want to go ahead and start putting any of your questions for Jules and or Candace in the chat, we will save those and ask them after. Candace, do you have any other advice or words of wisdom for people who are looking to practice healing?
Yeah, I know this is like a super indigenous thing to say, but it's so damn true. Connect to the land. Go out on the land as much as you can. It is one of the most healing things that you could ever do. Like when you're out there, like feel the land. Go touch a tree. Feel the sun. Let it heal you. Like yesterday, the sun was setting and I have a beautiful view in my apartment, and I just sat in the sunset and just let the warmth come over me. And because like currently, as we're speaking right now, I'm going through something really difficult, and right now I'm depending a lot on the land. And it does, like, and just as Jules was saying earlier, like Western science is finally catching up to the things that we knew this whole time, is that when you place even your feet on the land, it literally regulates your nervous system. I'm in Canada right now in Ottawa, and it's snowing, and maybe I can do that today. Maybe I will later, like quickly put my feet on the snow. There's just snow everywhere. I'm so tired of it. But it's water. Water is very healing. So connecting with the land, I think, and allowing yourself to be in it, feel everything, enjoy the land. And it is part of you. You're not apart from it. You are part of it. Allow yourself to feel emotions. Let it be ugly. Let it be messy. Connect with other folks. I think part of decolonizing is gathering other people to help support you. And that's actually part of what like those flowers were for. My parents sent me some flowers because I'm going through something, and that's their way of showing love, because I'm reaching out to them. I'm letting them know, like, hey, I'm not doing well right now. And that was their way of showing it. So we're never alone. I think community is so important, and creating your own safety and your own, I call, one of my friends calls it gathering your medicines, gathering the people that support you, that you know are there for you. It's been a huge life changer for me. Probably saved my life many times and I didn't know it. And challenge shame when you're feeling it to possibly even gratitude. So we often say, oh, I'm so sorry for being emotional. Say, I know my emotions are high, but I appreciate you holding space. Instead of saying, I'm sorry for being a burden, say, oh, I'm thankful for your support these days. So like not putting so much shame on your rawness and your humanity. And that's something I'm still learning. Like this is literally as I'm going through something right now. It's still something I'm learning and still practicing. It's not perfect, and that's okay. It's okay to be messy. It's okay to be human. And that's it.
I love that so much. That was beautiful. And we have a really good first question. I'm going to read the whole thing because there's a little background to it. It's from Kaishana Fleming. And sorry if I mispronounced that. I'm definitely in the grieving stages because I've lost friends who I thought were supportive. I've lost relationships that gave me the backbone to building myself up. But those roads can become destroyed with false hope, which break down any self-confidence I have. How can I build personal goals while going through grieving the loss of relationships that matter deeply? So, Jules or Candace, whoever wants that one.
I can respond to that one. I would say be present in this moment during the grieving, and you don't have to be productive during this process. You can take time to feel your feelings and work through that grief without demanding more of yourself. So building personal goals, maybe right now your only goal has to be processing the grief. Maybe that can be the goal until you're ready to move on, because you have to listen to yourself and your spirit and your body. And if you're feeling like you can't set personal goals for yourself right now, then don't. It's another colonial concept that we always have to be striving for more. We always have to do more, be better, always working on something. You are enough just exactly as you are, and you deserve to have self-care through your time of grieving.
I'll piggyback on that one. That was beautiful, Jules, and thank you. I needed that too. Because I have a lot of goals that I need to do, but I'm going through like my own stages of different types of grieving. And my personal goal today was like, get the fuck out of bed. Get out of bed. And I'm like, okay, Candace, just get out of bed, go wash your face. Just do that right now. Like in the next like half hour, that's your goal for the next half hour. You can make goals for yourself in like increments, like an hour. In 1 hour, I'll do this. So today I had to respond to some emails for work, and I gave myself some time. I'm like, okay, from 12:30 to 1:30, I'm going to answer emails, and that's my goal, and that's all I'll give that time for. And then later, I'll let myself feel. And if you really have to do something, one of the things that sorry, I got distracted by the beautiful sunset. I wish you guys could see it, but the camera won't let me. But one of the things that my friend taught me was when you need to do something, you know you have to do it. Write it down. Write down what is bothering you, everything, every raw, messed up emotion that you're feeling. Write it down, fold it up, put it in a box, and put it on a shelf and say, I'll get back to this later, but right now I need to do this. So that's just, and then you can come back to it later. You're not denying it forever. It can have its moment, but right now you just need to focus on something and do this, and then come back to it, which is what I'm going to do later. It's what I did. Is what got me here today, right now with you.
I had a generational tradition that was kind of similar to that was passed down, and it was the same thing except for put that paper in your pocket, and every time it starts bothering you, reach in there and rip it up, tear a piece off, and just that's it's not the same, and that probably wouldn't work as well for a lot of people, but for me, a lot of the times it was me just tearing up that grief and like destroying the power that it had over me. So to me, at least, that was something that but it wasn't writing down what you needed to do. It was more like writing down the pain and any shame that you're feeling as a result of things that people did to you or said about you. And then that way you're like, when you feel it start to intrude on your thoughts and your focus and your sense of balance, just tear a piece off. We have some other good questions that I think we have time for about one more. And this one's a tough one. How do we heal generational trauma when it's still happening, when the trauma and pain of older generations are being directly mirrored right now in us, and things feel like they just keep getting more dangerous? How do we not get lost in that? That's a good one.
I think giving yourself grace for that is that we don't have to fix all of it in this generation. I know there's like a humongous pressure because there is a lot of like talk out there, like breaking intergenerational trauma and stuff. And that is a really courageous thing to do. But give yourself grace to be human in that. You don't have to fix everything, and feel the hurt when you feel it. So you can be hurt and doing that. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's not a black and white thing. And I think that's what colonization does. Like it literally, like, it's crazy how like even just healing, it does something to our mind. It's like one or the other, but it can be both. You can still be hurting from what is currently happening in the family or in relationships and community, and still heal those pieces, like ask questions why they happen like that and how you could possibly make a change, how you could stop it in little ways. You don't have to do it all. That's not the call. It's the start. That's why we're here for an incremented time. We're here to eventually get there, but give ourselves grace. It's not going to happen all in one generation, and that's why we have community too. So that's what I have to say.
That fits right into that 7 generations teaching, where we're supposed to think about how our actions today will impact the next 7 generations. So we can't fix everything, but we can make small changes. We can offer comfort to others. We can be the person that we wish that we had for someone else. That's healing in and of itself, because Candace is completely right. We can't fix it all within one generation, but we can make progress and we can offer one another comfort and community.
Thank you both so much for that. And thank you for coming here. Thank you to our beautiful audience. We have seen so much dysregulation and trauma flaring recently. And so just coming together to do a positive thing in spite of all of that is being in community and building community. And I think that the world has so much to learn from both of you. And NeuroClastic is very fortunate to have you spend this time with us. So thank you for that. And we will conclude our broadcast at this point, unless Jules or Candace, you have anything you wanted to say before we go. Otherwise, Candace, if you put your feet on the snow, let us know, because that's awesome and amazing. And also neuroscience kind of shows that does slow our nervous system down. I know you said that with the lamb, but even the cold. And so that's something that we teach when you're in extreme dysregulation is it's safer than self-harm. And a lot of people do that. And so, yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah, if you don't have anything else to say, we'll go. But if you do, the floor is yours.
I just want to say, miigwech, thank you for having us. And thanks to everybody who watched and commented. I want to scroll through all the comments after.
Yeah, miigwech. That's the same way I say thank you in my language too, which is awesome. So miigwech, everybody. Such an honor to speak with you today, and I hope that our words resonate and really inspire you in your life. And I'll do my best to live by my own words too. So miigwech, thanks.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.